My dad smashed a brick into my face right after my fiancé refused to leave me for my sister. As the blood poured down my neck and stained my dress, my mother just stood there and laughed. "Let us see if he still loves you. Now, you ugly brat," she sneered, her eyes cold and merciless. They thought that brick would break me. They truly believed they held all the power in the world. They had no idea that the moment that rough clay tore my skin, they had personally signed the death warrant for their entire fake empire. My name is Zuri. I am 29 years old and I am the chief executive officer of a private cybersecurity and investment firm. But to my family, I am just a college dropout, a disappointment, a nobody. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives piece by piece and took everything they valued, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you love seeing toxic people get exactly what they deserve. The sun was beating down relentlessly on the manicured lawns of my parents' sprawling Buckhead estate in Atlanta. It was the annual family summer barbecue, an event designed exclusively for my father Jerome and my mother Beatrice to parade their wealth in front of the local elite. From the outside looking in, we were the perfect affluent Black American family. My father was a real estate mogul who slapped his name on half the commercial buildings in the city. He built his fortune on the backs of low-income families, buying up distressed properties and flipping them for astronomical profits, while loudly claiming to be a pillar of the community. My mother, Beatrice, was his perfect accomplice. She was a professional socialite, dripping in diamonds, turning a blind eye to his shady business practices as long as her closet remained stocked with the latest seasonal couture. She hosted charity galas just to ensure her picture landed in all the right local society magazines. But behind the wrought iron gates, the pristine landscaping, and the luxury cars parked in the circular driveway, this family was an absolute viper pit. I stood near the edge of the sprawling stone patio holding a glass of iced tea, wearing a simple tailored black sundress. I preferred to observe rather than participate in their circus. The air smelled of expensive smoked brisket and heavy perfume. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved silently through the crowd of local politicians, business owners, and old money families. My older brother Darius was holding court near the infinity pool, showing off his new luxury watch, while his wife Harper stood beside him, clinging to his arm like a trophy. Harper was everything my mother loved in a daughter-in-law, and everything I despised. She was white, wealthy, completely oblivious to her own privilege, and perfectly willing to play the ruthless game of Southern aristocracy. She ran an interior design company that catered exclusively to my parents' rich friends. As I watched the caterers moving through the crowd trying to keep up with the demands of the guests, Harper spotted me standing alone. A malicious spark lit up her eyes. She grabbed a greasy barbecue apron from a nearby prep table and marched directly over to me. "Zuri, be a dear and go check on the meat," she commanded, shoving the stained apron directly into my chest. Her voice carried that sickeningly sweet, condescending tone she reserved just for me. "The catering staff is moving entirely too slow, and we need someone to man the grill immediately." I did not take the apron, allowing it to fall to the stone patio between us. I looked down at it, and then back up at her perfectly powdered face. Harper had a habit of treating me like the hired help. It was her favorite party trick to put me in my place and remind me of my supposed lower status. "You have hands, Harper," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. "The grill is right over there." She let out a sharp, patronizing laugh and tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder, drawing the attention of a few nearby guests. "Oh, honey, you know I cannot mess up this silk dress," she said, gesturing to her designer outfit. "Besides, you are so much better at getting your hands dirty. It is not like you have a high-profile career to maintain. You are just a lowly IT worker, right? A college dropout fixing computers for minimum wage. This kind of manual labor is more your speed." My mother Beatrice drifted over, catching the tail end of the conversation. She took a sip of her champagne and nodded in agreement with Harper, her eyes scanning my simple dress with clear disdain. "Your sister-in-law is right, Zuri," my mother said, adjusting her heavy diamond necklace. "The least you can do is make yourself useful today. You showed up empty-handed again while your brother brought 3 cases of vintage wine. It is frankly embarrassing. You are lucky we even let you attend these elite gatherings given how you refuse to make something of yourself. You are always so articulate when you try, Zuri. Harper chimed in, stepping closer and reaching out to touch my natural hair without asking. If you just tamed this hair and went back to school, maybe you could find a nice entry-level corporate job instead of whatever little tech support thing you do in your cramped apartment. You just do not fit in with this crowd, honey. You stick out like a sore thumb. I did not flinch. I did not swat her hand away. I just stared at her with a chilling calm that I knew unsettled her. 10 years ago, when I was 18, my parents threw me out of the house because I refused to go to law school. I wanted to pursue cybersecurity and software development. They called me a failure, a waste of space, and cut me off entirely without a single dime. I spent years sleeping on couches, working brutal night shifts, and building my empire line of code by line of code. I had secured government contracts, protected major financial institutions from cyber threats, and built an investment portfolio that rivaled the very politicians drinking my father's liquor on the patio. They had no idea that the little tech support thing I did was actually a multi-million-dollar private intelligence and investment firm. They had no idea that I held the keys to the very city they claimed to rule. I smiled slowly, letting the silence stretch until Harper shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. You know, Harper, it is funny you mentioned making myself useful. I said, my voice smooth and projecting just enough for the surrounding guests to hear clearly. I was actually spending my morning being very useful. I was looking at some public tax records. Did you know that your luxury interior design firm is currently 6 months behind on federal taxes? Harper froze instantly. Her hand dropped from my hair and the smug, arrogant smile vanished from her face, replaced by sheer panic. What are you talking about? She hissed, lowering her voice and darting her eyes around to see if anyone was listening to us. I took a deliberate step closer, invading her personal space. I am talking about the $300,000 you owe the Internal Revenue Service, I said, keeping my tone conversational and light as if discussing the weather. The penalty notices that were sent to your office last Tuesday. You have been using company funds to finance your personal shopping sprees at Dior and ignoring the taxman entirely. That is a very dangerous game to play for someone so incredibly concerned with high-profile appearances and silk dresses. My mother gripped her champagne flute tightly, looking back and forth between us, her perfectly contoured face twisting in confusion. Zuri, stop making up lies right now, she snapped. Harper runs a very successful business. She is a pillar of this community. It is not a lie, Beatrice, I said deliberately, using her first name to remind her I was no longer under her control. It is public record if you possess the skills to know exactly where to look. And given that Dad just co-signed a massive business loan for Darius using Harper's failing company as collateral, I would say that makes your little tax evasion a massive family problem. I turned my attention back to Harper, whose face had drained of all color, making her look ghostly pale under the bright Atlanta sun. So no, Harper, I will not be flipping your ribs today. I suggest you go do it yourself before the stress of a federal audit makes you lose your appetite completely. And maybe you should hold off on buying any more vintage wine until you pay your debts. I stepped around the fallen apron, leaving them both standing there in stunned, speechless horror. As I walked back toward the main house to get another drink, I felt a deep, satisfying thrill. They still viewed me as the helpless victim, the outcast they could trample on. They were completely blind to the fact that I was not just in their league, I owned the playing field. The party was just getting started and I was already tearing down their walls. I left Harper standing by the grill clutching her silk dress, her face completely drained of its arrogant color. Turning my back on her panic, I navigated through the sea of local politicians and wealthy socialites, my eyes scanning the sprawling stone patio for Marcus. I needed the grounding presence of my fiancé. But as I spotted his tall frame near the outdoor bar, a cold knot formed in my stomach. He was not alone. Chloe had arrived. My 25-year-old sister was the undisputed golden child, the fragile princess my parents paraded around as their ultimate achievement. While the rest of the guests were dressed in elegant afternoon garden attire, Chloe looked like she was ready for a late-night VIP club appearance. She wore a skin-tight neon pink dress with plunging cutouts that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. Every male gaze on the patio lingered on her as she walked, a fact she clearly relished. My parents, as always, turned a blind eye to her desperate need for attention. To them, she was perfect. But Chloe was not interested in the guests. Her eyes were locked onto Marcus. At 32, Marcus was breathtaking. He was a highly respected pediatric surgeon, a man whose hands saved children's lives daily. He possessed a quiet, unshakable integrity that contrasted sharply with the toxic rot of my family. He loved me for my brilliant mind, my relentless ambition, and the deep scars I carried from growing up in this house. Chloe hated him for it. She hated that someone of his caliber belonged to the sister she deemed a failure. I watched my feet rooted to the stone path as she intercepted him before he could walk away. Marcus was holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, clearly looking for me, when Chloe stepped directly into his personal space. She blocked his path completely. I could not hear her opening line over the smooth jazz music drifting from the hidden outdoor speakers, but her body language was screamingly obvious. She reached out, running a long French manicured finger down the lapel of his crisp linen shirt. Marcus immediately stiffened. He took a polite but firm step backward, trying to maintain a respectful boundary. Chloe simply smirked and closed the distance again, backing him slightly toward the stone railing of the bar. I started walking toward them, my heels clicking sharply against the pavers, my blood beginning to boil. As I got closer, her syrupy, venomous voice became crystal clear. "Come on, Marcus." Chloe purred, batting her eyelashes and pressing her palm flat against his chest. "You cannot seriously be happy with her. Zuri is essentially a robot. She sits behind a glowing computer screen all day in that cramped, depressing apartment. She is dry. She is cold. She does not know how to treat a real man of your status." Marcus looked down at her hand as if a venomous snake had just landed on his shirt. His jaw clenched tight, a visible muscle ticking in his cheek. He was a man of immense patience, but his tolerance for disrespect toward me was absolutely zero. Chloe completely misread his silence, mistaking his shocked disgust for hesitation. She leaned in even closer, her lips hovering just inches from his ear, her voice dropping to a loud, provocative whisper meant to seduce. "You are a successful doctor. You deserve someone who knows how to have fun, someone warm, someone who naturally fits in with high society. Leave her. Drop the dead weight. We could slip away right now, go inside, and I can show you what a real passionate woman feels like." That was the breaking point. The moment the polite facade shattered, Marcus did not just step back this time. He forcefully shoved her hand off his chest with a sharp, explosive motion of pure revulsion. The sudden, violent movement caught the attention of the surrounding guests. The low hum of polite conversation began to die down, heads turning to see what was causing the commotion at the bar. "Do not ever touch me again," Marcus said. His voice was not a whisper. It was a deep, resonant boom that carried across the entire patio, slicing right through the jazz music and the clinking of crystal glasses. Every single head snapped in their direction. My mother paused mid-sip of her champagne. My father stopped laughing at a joke, his face instantly hardening. Chloe froze her eyes wide, entirely unaccustomed to being rejected, let alone reprimanded in public. "Marcus, I was just playing around." She stammered, her fake, sweet facade slipping to reveal genuine panic. "You were just offering yourself to your sister's fiancé." Marcus interrupted, his voice ringing with absolute authority and unyielding disgust. He looked her up and down with an expression of pure, unfiltered revulsion, making sure his words carried to every listening ear. "Let me make this crystal clear for you, Chloe, and for anyone else listening. I would rather die cold and completely alone than let someone as cheap, classless, and pathetic as you lay a single finger on me. Do not ever speak about Zuri that way again." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the ice melting in the unattended glasses. For a split second, I saw real, unadulterated shame flash across Chloe's face. She had played her ultimate hand in front of Atlanta's elite and had been brutally, publicly humiliated. The golden child had been rejected for the outcast. But Chloe was a master manipulator trained by the very best in the art of deceit. She knew she could never win a battle of morals or integrity, so she instantly switched to the only tactic she had left. If she could not be the seductress, she would be the victim. The transition was seamless, almost terrifying to witness. Her face contorted from bitter embarrassment to sheer manufactured terror. She let out a dramatic, breathless gasp. Then, taking a sudden, exaggerated step backward, she deliberately twisted her ankle in her towering high heels. She let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream and threw her entire body backward with theatrical force. She crashed hard into a glass-topped side table, sending expensive hors d'oeuvres and crystal plates shattering onto the ground before tumbling down hard onto the stone pavers. The performance was Oscar-worthy. She lay on the ground amid the broken glass, clutching her arm and sobbing hysterically, her chest heaving with fake hyperventilation. "Why did you push me?" she wailed, her voice echoing off the brick walls of the mansion, sounding like a terrified child. "Mom. Dad, help me. He attacked me." Chaos erupted instantly. The polite garden party dissolved into a frenzy of gasps and shouts. Guests backed away in shock, murmuring in horrified disbelief. I broke into a run, rushing to stand by Marcus's side, grabbing his arm as he stood there, looking down at her performance with utter bewilderment. He had barely touched her, only brushing her hand away, but Chloe was writhing on the ground, acting as if he had thrown her off a balcony. The trap had been sprung, and the venomous heart of my family was about to show its true colors. The heavy glass doors of the main house flew open with a violent crash. My father Jerome charged onto the patio like an enraged bull. He was a massive man who used his physical size to intimidate his business rivals and his family alike. Seeing his precious golden child weeping among the shattered crystal sent him into a blind, absolute fury. He shoved past the gasping guests, knocking a waiter aside, and dropped to his heavy knees next to Chloe. "What happened to my daughter?" he roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. Chloe clung to his expensive suit jacket, burying her face in his chest to hide her lack of actual tears. "He attacked me, Daddy," she sobbed, her voice muffled but perfectly audible to the captivated audience. "I was just trying to welcome him to the family, and he shoved me backward into the table. I think my arm is broken." Jerome slowly stood up. The veins in his thick neck were bulging, pulsing with toxic adrenaline. He locked his furious gaze onto Marcus, who was still standing tall and entirely unfazed by the theatrical display. "You dare come into my home, drink my liquor, and lay your hands on my little girl," Jerome bellowed, stepping aggressively into Marcus's personal space. Marcus did not yield a single inch. He looked my father dead in the eye with the calm, clinical detachment of a surgeon diagnosing a terminal disease. "I did not attack her," Marcus stated, his voice steady and resolute. "She made an inappropriate and highly disrespectful advance. I simply removed her hand from my chest and told her to back off. She threw herself into that table." "Liar," Chloe shrieked from the ground, pointing a trembling manicured finger at him. "He is lying. He tried to grab me." That was all the justification Jerome needed. The truth did not matter to him. The only thing that mattered was protecting the flawless image of his favorite child and asserting his absolute dominance over anyone who dared to cross him. He pointed a thick, rigid finger right between Marcus's eyes. "You are going to get down on your knees right now and beg my daughter for forgiveness," Jerome demanded, his voice dripping with venomous authority. "You are going to apologize to her in front of everyone here. And then you are going to call off this ridiculous engagement to Zuri immediately. That is the only way you are walking out of this estate with your medical license and your life intact. I will personally see to it that you never practice medicine in this state again." The sheer audacity of the demand hung heavily in the humid summer air. The surrounding guests held their collective breath, unable to look away from the escalating spectacle. My father actually believed his wealth and status gave him the power to order a grown man to his knees and destroy my relationship as a form of twisted compensation. It was the ultimate display of his suffocating narcissism. I stepped directly between them. I placed my body as a physical barrier, shielding Marcus from my father's unhinged wrath. "Dad, stop it," I commanded, my voice slicing through his arrogant delusions. "Marcus is telling the exact truth." Chloe completely threw herself at him, and when he rejected her, she staged this entire pathetic accident. "You are making a fool of yourself in front of half the city." Jerome's eyes darkened. To him, my defiance was a far greater crime than anything Marcus could have supposedly done. I was the outcast. I was the failure. I had no right to challenge the king in his own castle. "Shut your mouth, you worthless disappointment," Jerome spat, stepping closer until I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "This is exactly why you will always be a failure. You bring a violent, unstable man into my home, and then you have the nerve to defend him over your own flesh and blood. You are just as pathetic and cheap as he is." Marcus gently grabbed my waist, attempting to pull me behind him to protect me, but I stood my ground. "We are leaving," I said to Marcus, ignoring my father entirely. "This toxic display is exactly why I never come here." I turned my back on Jerome. It was the ultimate gesture of disrespect to a man who demanded total obedience. I reached for Marcus's hand, intending to walk away from the poison of my family forever. I did not see my father lunge toward the edge of the patio where a stack of heavy red clay paving bricks sat waiting for a landscaping project. I did not see him wrap his large hand around the rough edges of the solid stone. I only heard the sudden terrified gasp from the crowd and the sound of heavy footsteps rushing up behind me. Before I could even turn around, a blinding white-hot explosion of agony erupted across the right side of my face. The impact was deafening. The sound of the rough clay brick crushing against my cheekbone echoed with a sickening crack. The force of the blow was so immense it lifted me entirely off my feet. The world violently spun out of control. I collapsed onto the hard stone patio, my ears ringing with a high-pitched tone that drowned out the screams of the guests. Warm, thick liquid immediately flooded down my cheek and poured into my eye. It cascaded down my neck, soaking into the fabric of my black sundress. I lay there in a state of paralyzing shock, tasting copper and ash, struggling to draw a single breath into my lungs. Every nerve in my face was screaming in absolute, unendurable agony. Through my blurred, red-stained vision, I saw my mother Beatrice step forward. She did not rush to my side. She did not scream for an ambulance. She stood perfectly still, looking down at me, as a pool of my own blood spread across the pristine pavers. A slow, chilling smirk crept across her perfectly painted lips. "Let us see if that fancy doctor still loves you now, you ugly brat," she sneered, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. The sheer inhumanity of her words broke the spell holding Marcus back. He let out a raw, guttural roar of pure primal fury. He did not hesitate. He did not care about the legal consequences or the wealthy witnesses standing around us. Marcus lunged forward with explosive speed, grabbing my father by the collar of his expensive tailored shirt. Before Jerome could even raise his arms to defend himself, Marcus drove his fist directly into my father's jaw with devastating surgical precision. The impact was brutal. Jerome's eyes rolled back into his head, and his massive frame crumpled to the patio floor like a discarded rag doll, completely unconscious before he even hit the ground. The crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. People were screaming, running toward the exits, and calling frantically for security. Harper shrieked, dropping her drink while Chloe scrambled backward away from the broken glass, her fake injury entirely forgotten in the face of real violence. Darius just stood there, too cowardly to intervene, while his father lay bleeding on the stone. Marcus did not spare any of them a single glance. He dropped to his knees beside me, his hands moving with frantic but practiced medical care. He stripped off his linen shirt, pressing it firmly against my mangled face to stem the heavy flow of blood. His eyes, usually so calm and reassuring, were wild with terror and rage. "Zuri, stay with me," he pleaded, his voice shaking as he scooped my limp body into his arms. "I have got you. You are going to be okay." He stood up, cradling me against his bare chest, and sprinted toward the driveway. My mother shouted something after us, threatening police and lawsuits, but her voice was quickly swallowed by the rushing wind and my fading consciousness. Marcus kicked the doors of his car open gently, laying me across the back seat and keeping the pressure applied to my wound with his ruined shirt. He jumped into the driver's seat tires, screeching against the asphalt as he tore out of the estate gates, leaving the shattered remains of my family behind. The last thing I remember before the heavy curtain of darkness completely overtook me was the sharp, piercing wail of approaching ambulances cutting through the warm Atlanta night. The distant flashing red and blue lights signaled the absolute end of my old life and the violent, bloody beginning of my war. The rhythmic, sterile beeping of the heart monitor replaced the frantic wailing of the ambulance sirens. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room burned fiercely through my closed eyelids. Every pulse of my heart sent a blinding, white-hot shockwave across the right side of my face. 15 stitches. That was the exact price of standing up to my father. 15 sharp, agonizing pulls of a surgical needle pulling my torn skin back together. Marcus sat tightly beside my narrow hospital bed, his large, capable hands entirely engulfing my cold fingers. His knuckles were severely bruised, the skin split wide open from where his fist had connected with Jerome's jaw. He had not left my side for a single second. The emergency room staff, instantly recognizing one of their most respected and brilliant surgeons, had bypassed all standard protocols to let him stay in the trauma bay. He watched the attending doctor finish tying off the final suture with a dark, terrifying intensity. Before the doctor could even secure the protective bandage, the heavy double doors of the private bay swung open with a violent thud. A startled nurse tried to step forward and block the entrance, stammering rapidly about restricted access and patient privacy, but she was quickly and ruthlessly pushed aside. Money and entitlement did not respect hospital rules. My father walked in first. The entire left side of his jaw was an angry, swollen shade of purple, a highly visible testament to Marcus's protective fury. Despite the painful injury, Jerome's eyes burned with that familiar, suffocating dominance. Following closely behind him was my mother, Beatrice. Not a single strand of her elegant hair was out of place. She looked completely unaffected by the fact that she had casually stood by while her husband crushed her daughter's face with a heavy stone. Harper marched in next, her expensive designer heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. Trailing them like an obedient shadow was an older man in a tailored charcoal suit, clutching a thick leather briefcase tightly against his chest. Marcus instantly stood up. His metal chair scraped loudly against the tile floor. He stepped directly between my bed and my toxic family, using his broad shoulders to form an impenetrable shield. "Get out," Marcus ordered. His voice was dangerously low, vibrating with a lethal, barely contained calm. "If you take one more step toward her, I will call hospital security and have you all arrested for aggravated assault." Harper let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She stepped around our father, completely unfazed by Marcus's stern warning. "You are not calling anyone doctor. In fact, you are going to stand down and listen very carefully if you ever want to step foot inside an operating room again." Harper crossed her arms, a smug, venomous smile spreading across her flawlessly made-up face. "Do you really think you can assault a prominent businessman like Jerome and just walk away? I sit on the charity boards with 3 of the chief administrators of this exact hospital. By tomorrow morning, I can have a perfectly coordinated narrative plastered across every single local news outlet and medical board in the state. We will claim you showed up to our private family gathering completely intoxicated and unhinged. We will say you attacked my father without any provocation whatsoever, and that Zuri was tragically caught in the crossfire of your violent, uncontrollable outburst. Who do you think the ethics committee will believe, a wealthy, highly respected political family, or a hot-headed surgeon with felony assault charges pending?" The sheer audacity of the lie stole the breath right out of my lungs. They were actually going to frame Marcus. They were prepared to destroy his entire life, strip away the prestigious medical license he had spent over a decade earning, and drag his flawless reputation through the mud, just to protect Jerome from facing justice. I squeezed Marcus's hand tightly, feeling the rigid, coiled tension in his muscles. He was entirely ready to risk it all to defend me, but I could not let them destroy his noble career over my family's madness. Before Marcus could unleash his retaliation, Beatrice stepped forward. Her cold, calculating eyes bypassed him entirely. and locked directly onto me. There was not a single shred of maternal concern in her gaze. She looked at my bandaged, bleeding face the exact same way she would look at a bad financial investment or a failing stock. She snapped her fingers sharply at the man in the charcoal suit. The lawyer stepped forward, instantly unzipped his leather briefcase, and handed her a crisp, thick stack of legal documents. Beatrice walked to the very edge of the hospital bed and tossed the heavy packet directly onto my lap. It landed heavily against my legs, the sharp edges of the paper brushing against my blanket. "Sign it," Beatrice commanded. Her voice was flat, totally devoid of any human emotion. "It is a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and a formal waiver of all liability. You will state on the official record that you tripped and fell onto the patio stones. You will not mention your father. You will absolutely not speak to the police. You will sign this right now, and this unfortunate incident will be completely erased." I stared down at the stack of papers, my good eye burning with unshed tears of pure, unadulterated rage. "You want me to lie?" I rasped, my voice hoarse and broken from the pain radiating through my jaw. "He nearly killed me, and you just want me to sign a piece of paper to cover it up." Beatrice leaned closer, her heavy, expensive perfume entirely masking the sharp smell of the hospital antiseptic. "This family cannot afford a violence scandal right now, Zuri. You have already jeopardized your father's $20 million funding project with this ridiculous dramatic stunt. We are securing a massive round of investments from highly conservative overseas partners next week. If any rumors of a domestic assault leak to the press, the investors will pull out immediately. We stand to lose everything because you could not control your temper and your unstable fiancé." The lawyer pushed his glasses up his nose and chimed in, his tone practiced and oily. "We have already secured the silence of the catering staff and the guests. Generous compensations have been distributed. If you choose to speak out, you will be standing entirely alone. We will counter-sue for defamation, libel, and extortion. We will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt." I looked at the three of them standing at the foot of my bed. My father hiding his cowardice behind his women and his vast fortune. My sister happily wielding her social connections like a loaded weapon against an innocent man. My mother calculating the exact monetary cost of her daughter's blood against her corporate bank accounts. They were not a family. They were a ruthless, cold-blooded syndicate. They fully expected me to simply absorb the abuse, to fade back into the background like I always did, and to prioritize their extreme wealth over my own physical safety. Beatrice tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail against the top page of the legal packet, delivering her final devastating blow. "You have two distinct choices, Zuri. Sign the document, take your little doctor, and go back to your quiet, mediocre life. We will pay your medical bills out of pocket as a courtesy. Or you refuse, and we will crush both of you. We will make sure Marcus loses everything he has ever worked for. We will make sure you never find employment in this city again. Think very carefully before you throw away your entire future out of pure spite." Marcus snatched the thick packet from my lap. His large hands clamped around the edges of the heavy parchment, his knuckles turning stark white as he prepared to rip the miserable legal threat into unreadable shreds. He looked fully prepared to wad up the destroyed documents and hurl them directly into my mother's flawless, apathetic face. He would have gladly taken the assault charges if it meant defending my honor in that sterile hospital room. I placed my hand firmly over his. My fingers were cold from the shock of the injury, but my grip was like forged iron. "Stop," I commanded him. My voice was no longer hoarse or trembling. It was dead calm, ringing with an icy authority that made Marcus freeze instantly. I looked up at the lawyer standing nervously behind my mother. "Give me a pen," I said. Marcus stared at me in absolute, unadulterated shock. "Zuri, you cannot be serious," he protested, his voice thick with protective desperation. "You are not signing that garbage." I did not break eye contact with the lawyer. I held out my expectant hand. The man eagerly produced a sleek silver pen from his breast pocket and handed it over with a sickeningly polite nod. I flipped straight to the final signature line on the last page. I did not bother reading the vile stipulations or the suffocating non-disclosure clauses. I knew exactly what they said. My family demanded total silence, and they were using Marcus's pristine medical career as collateral to ensure they got it. I pressed the silver pen to the paper and signed my name with sharp, precise, unflinching strokes. I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. I handed the heavy packet back to the lawyer. Then I looked at my mother, shifted my gaze to my father, and finally rested my eyes on my sister, who was watching me from the doorway with a sneer of absolute victory. "You have your signature," I said, my voice echoing coldly off the tiled walls of the trauma bay. "Now get out of my room, all of you, instantly." Beatrice snatched the executed documents from the lawyer's hands. A triumphant, vicious smile illuminated her face, making her look both beautiful and monstrous. "Smart girl," she sneered, tucking the papers securely against her chest. "For a moment I thought you were actually going to be difficult. It is good to see you finally understand your proper place in this family. You always were the weak link." Jerome chuckled, a dark, booming sound of pure, concentrated arrogance. He touched his bruised, swollen jaw, glaring at Marcus with supreme satisfaction. "I told you she was a coward," my father muttered to Harper, ensuring his voice was loud enough for me to hear. "Always was. Always will be. Let us go. The smell of this hospital is making me violently ill." Harper offered one last look of absolute disdain at Marcus, rolling her eyes, as if he were nothing more than a minor inconvenience they had successfully swatted away. She turned on her expensive designer heel, leading the procession out into the corridor. They marched out of the trauma bay, a victorious parade of predators who genuinely believed they had just crushed their prey into permanent submission. The heavy doors swung shut behind them with a definitive click, sealing the room in a sudden, ringing silence. Marcus turned to me immediately. His chest was heaving, his eyes wild with a turbulent mixture of betrayal and protective rage. "Zuri, why did you do that?" he demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. "They assaulted you. Your father nearly killed you with a brick, and they threatened my entire career. I do not care about my medical license if it means letting that monster get away with breaking your face. We could have fought them. I would have gladly fought them for you." I reached up with my uninjured hand and gently touched his bruised, split knuckles. I traced the angry red skin where his fist had connected with my father's face. "I know you would have fought for me," I said softly, looking deeply into his panicked eyes. "But fighting them in a courtroom over a domestic dispute is exactly how we lose." I sat up slightly, gritting my teeth as a blinding throb of agony radiated through my shattered cheekbone. I pointed toward the small plastic chair in the corner where Marcus had dropped my tote bag during the chaotic rush into the emergency room. "Hand me my bag, please." Marcus frowned, clearly struggling to understand my sudden shift in demeanor, but he complied. He brought the heavy leather tote to the bed and set it gently on my lap. I unzipped the main compartment and pulled out my sleek silver laptop. I rested it carefully on my knees and flipped the screen open. The cool glow of the monitor immediately reflected off the pristine white bandages covering the right side of my face. "If we called the police right now," I explained, my fingers hovering lightly over the keyboard, "what do you think would actually happen to a man like Jerome? He has the most vicious defense attorneys in the state on a permanent astronomical retainer. He plays golf with the district attorney every single Sunday. He heavily funds the political campaigns of the local judges. At best, he would be charged with misdemeanor assault. He would pay a negligible fine that he would not even notice, perhaps do a few hours of community service entirely on paper, and the entire violent incident would be swept perfectly under the rug by his public relations team within 48 hours. Marcus stayed silent, standing at the side of my bed. He absorbed the harsh, undeniable reality of my words. He knew how the wealthy operated in this city. He knew the justice system rarely punished men who could afford to buy their way out of a holding cell. "An assault charge is nothing but a minor temporary inconvenience to a man like my father." I continued typing my complex multi-tiered password into the black security prompt on my screen. "It does not hurt him. It does not teach him a lesson. The only thing my family respects, the only thing they truly fear losing, is their immense wealth and their immaculate public image." The screen unlocked, revealing a highly secure encrypted database. Lines of complex code, restricted financial projections, and intercepted corporate emails filled the display in a rapid cascading stream of data. My mother proudly mentioned the $20 million funding project they are closing next week. I said, a cold, predatory smile forming on my uninjured cheek. What Beatrice does not realize is that I already know absolutely everything about it. I know exactly who the overseas investors are. I know the highly sensitive terms of their agreements. And more importantly, I know about the massive illegal discrepancies hidden deep within my father's corporate tax filings that he is actively using to secure that specific funding. Marcus stared at the scrolling text on the screen, then looked down at me, his expression shifting from confusion to absolute awe. He looked at me as if he were seeing the real me for the very first time. "You are not just a freelance data consultant, are you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "My family thinks I am a dry, boring robot sitting in a cramped apartment doing tedious data entry." I said, my voice hardening into a blade of pure, unbreakable steel. "Chloe literally just mocked me for it an hour ago. They think I am a total failure because I completely rejected their superficial social climbing. They never bothered to understand what I actually do for a living because they were too busy looking down on me." I turned the laptop screen slightly so Marcus could see the header of the main file. "For the past 5 years, I have been building one of the most elite corporate intelligence and cybersecurity firms on the East Coast," I revealed. "I am the ghost in the machine that rival corporations hire to find the fatal hidden flaws in their competitors. I hunt corporate secrets for a living, Marcus. And nobody holds more toxic, highly illegal secrets than Jerome." I tapped a single key, highlighting a master folder containing highly sensitive, damning financial records belonging entirely to my father's vast real estate empire. "I signed that non-disclosure agreement because it gives them a false sense of absolute security," I told him, looking back up into his eyes. "They think they have silenced me. They think they have won the war by threatening your medical license. But that signature was not an act of surrender, Marcus. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. They just handed me the exact timeline I need to destroy them." I closed the laptop with a sharp, decisive snap. I looked at the incredible man standing beside my hospital bed, ensuring he understood the absolute gravity of my promise. I am not going to send my father to a comfortable air-conditioned holding cell for a few hours. I am going to systematically dismantle his entire corporate empire piece by piece. I am going to torch that $20 million deal to ashes and expose him to the federal authorities. I am going to strip them of their dirty money, their elite status, and their sickening pride. By the time I am finished with them, they will drop to their knees and wish I had only called the police." Marcus let out a slow, ragged breath and sank back into the stiff plastic hospital chair. The sheer magnitude of my revelation hung heavily in the sterile air of the trauma bay. He stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, watching the relentless stream of financial data scroll past, and then looked back at my bandaged face. The frantic panic that had clouded his eyes just moments before was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, reverent understanding. I had spent my entire life playing the role of the quiet, unremarkable disappointment, allowing my family to believe their own arrogant narrative. Now the curtain was finally dropping. "My cybersecurity firm is only the acquisition branch of my actual operation," I explained, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced lethal precision. "Information is power, Marcus, but capital is the weapon that wields it. 3 years ago, I used the intelligence my firm gathered to establish an aggressive, highly discreet private equity fund. We specialize in acquiring distressed corporate debt. We find the bleeding, bloated companies that are rotting from the inside out. We quietly buy up their massive liabilities through untraceable shell corporations, and we take absolute control." I opened a new window on my screen, bypassing 2 layers of biometric security to access the master dashboard of my investment fund. A complex web of corporate hierarchies, property deeds, and staggering loan amounts populated the display. At the very center of the web was the gleaming gold-plated logo of Jerome Wilson's real estate empire. "Look closely at my father's kingdom," I instructed, tilting the screen toward Marcus. Marcus leaned in his medical mind, easily adapting to the analytical data spread before him. He scanned the red numbers, his brow furrowing in deep concentration. "He is drowning," Marcus whispered, tracing a line of massive deficits with his bruised index finger. "According to this, his primary holding company is entirely insolvent. He is bankrupt in everything but name." I confirmed, feeling a dark, satisfying thrill as I spoke the truth aloud. Jerome has not turned a legitimate profit in over 3 years. He survives entirely on vanity, intimidation, and a constant desperate cycle of high-interest bridge loans. He takes on massive new debt just to pay the interest on his old debt. He convinced himself he was too big to fail, too important to ever be audited by the banks he bullied. He thought he was untouchable. I clicked a folder labeled with a string of alphanumeric codes, opening a highly classified ledger of acquired corporate liabilities. When Jerome's traditional lenders finally realized his empire was a hollow house of cards, they panicked. I continued, my voice dropping to a calm surgical chill. They wanted to offload his toxic debt immediately before the inevitable collapse. So a mysterious, faceless overseas investment group stepped in and happily bought up all of his bad loans at a premium fraction of their cost. Jerome was thrilled. He bragged about his new international backers for months. He thought he had outsmarted the local banks. I looked directly into Marcus's eyes, allowing the full weight of the trap to settle between us. He never once realized that the mysterious investment group holding the strings to his entire empire was me, I said. I am his primary creditor. I own the mortgage on his corporate headquarters. I own the liens on his luxury developments. I effectively own him. The silence in the hospital room was absolute. Outside our door, the frantic pace of the emergency room continued, but inside our small curtained-off world, a titan was about to be executed. My father's entire survival hinges on that $20 million overseas investment he mentioned earlier. I explained, pulling up the specific loan agreements currently keeping Jerome out of federal bankruptcy court. But to secure that new capital, he desperately needs his current creditors to extend a $5 million grace period on a loan that matured at midnight last night. If that specific loan goes into default, it triggers a catastrophic chain reaction. His new investors will see the default panic and pull their $20 million off the table instantly. My cursor hovered directly over a stark red command button on the private equity portal. The button was linked directly to the automated banking clearinghouses. He expects the extension to be approved automatically this morning, I said softly. He thinks he bought his safety by forcing me to sign that pathetic non-disclosure agreement. He actually believes he won. I did not hesitate. I did not feel a single ounce of daughterly guilt or familial obligation. I remembered the heavy, suffocating weight of my father's hand as he swung that clay brick into my face. I remembered the vile, triumphant smirk on my mother's lips as she watched me bleed onto the patio stones. I pressed the enter key with a sharp, decisive strike. The screen blinked, processing the encrypted command. A green confirmation banner appeared across the top of the dashboard. The official mandate had been sent. The Shadow Fund had formally, legally, and aggressively denied the $5 million extension. The loan was instantly classified as in default, and an automated demand for immediate full repayment was dispatched to Jerome's chief financial officer. That was the first shot, I murmured, feeling the adrenaline temporarily mask the throbbing pain in my fractured cheekbone. It was completely silent, but by noon today it will blow a crater straight through the center of his life. Marcus let out a low, disbelieving laugh, shaking his head in absolute awe. He reached out and gently cupped the uninjured side of my face, his thumb stroking my jawline. "You are the most terrifying, brilliant woman I have ever met," he said, his voice thick with profound admiration. "But what about Harper? She threatened to destroy my medical license. She is going to mobilize her charity boards against me the second she gets back to the estate." I smiled, though the movement pulled agonizingly at my fresh stitches. "Harper made a fatal miscalculation today," I replied, opening a new, heavily encrypted terminal on my laptop. "She brought a knife to a digital gunfight." My sister loved to flaunt her high society connections. She ran a boutique public relations and charity consulting firm that catered exclusively to the wealthiest, most corrupt families in the state. She used her position on prestigious hospital and charity boards to launder money, skimming massive consulting fees off the top of tax-deductible donations. It was an elegant, highly illegal grift that funded her designer wardrobe and her luxury lifestyle. I have been quietly archiving Harper's internal financial servers for 14 months. I explained to Marcus, bringing up a massive directory of intercepted banking transfers, falsified invoices, and explicit email chains detailing gross embezzlement. She is sloppy. She uses the exact same password for her corporate banking that she uses for her social media accounts. I selected the entire directory, bundling the damning evidence into a single heavily encrypted data packet. Harper wanted to use the media and the ethics committees to frame you for an unprovoked assault. She wanted to play the role of the righteous victimized socialite. We are going to ensure she never sits on a public board or speaks to a reporter ever again. I engaged a specialized routing program designed to mask the origin of outbound data. I loaded the encrypted packet containing every single shred of Harper's fraudulent charity dealings. In the recipient fields, I entered the direct email addresses for the State Attorney General's Fraud Division, the lead investigative auditors at the IRS, and the senior editors of the 3 largest newspapers in the region. I hit send. The progress bar filled instantly, distributing the radioactive files to the authorities who would tear Harper's pristine, arrogant life completely apart. There would be no warning. There would be no opportunity for her high-priced lawyers to spin a false narrative or prepare a defense. By the time Harper woke up tomorrow morning, federal auditors would be freezing her corporate accounts and freezing her personal assets. I closed the laptop and leaned my head back against the thin hospital pillow. The digital execution was complete. The silent bombs had been planted directly beneath the foundation of my family's empire, and the timers were rapidly ticking down to 0. "Take me home, Marcus," I said, looking at the man who had been willing to throw away his entire future just to protect me. "I want to be sitting comfortably on our sofa when their world starts burning down." The drive back to our apartment was enveloped in a heavy contemplative silence. Marcus kept his uninjured hand on the steering wheel, and his bruised hand tightly wrapped around my cold fingers. The moment we walked through the front door of our quiet sanctuary, the aggressive adrenaline that had fueled my hospital confrontation began to recede, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. I sank into the plush cushions of our living room sofa, letting the familiar scent of our home wash over me. Marcus gently covered my legs with a woven throw blanket before disappearing into the kitchen to prepare an ice pack and strong tea. I did not sleep that night. I sat perfectly still in the dark, the harsh blue light of my laptop screen illuminating the room as I watched the digital tripwires I had meticulously laid across my family's network. I was waiting for their inevitable retaliation. I knew exactly how my mother and sister operated. They were predators who hunted for sport, and they would not simply walk away after I had defied them in the hospital. They needed to make an example of me. They needed to prove that they still held the leash. The first strike came precisely at 7 in the morning. I was sipping my tea when my phone vibrated with a social media notification. Harper had just updated her public profile, which boasted hundreds of thousands of followers who worshipped her carefully curated lifestyle. I opened the application and found a high-resolution, perfectly lit photograph of Harper looking somberly out a window, clutching a mug of coffee with both hands. The caption beneath it was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. "My heart is incredibly heavy today," Harper wrote. "Please send your deepest prayers for my younger sister who is currently battling severe, undiagnosed mental health challenges. Domestic accidents and tragic incidents of self-inflicted harm are a devastating reality for those who refuse psychiatric intervention. Our family is heartbroken, but we are choosing to love her from a safe distance while she heals. Mental health matters." She was publicly branding me as a psychotic, suicidal woman. It was a brilliantly evil move. By planting the seed of mental instability, Harper was actively discrediting anything I might say in the future. If I ever tried to tell the police that Jerome had smashed my face with a brick, The narrative was already established. The public, the media, and the authorities would simply look at Harper's post and dismiss my accusations as the paranoid delusions of a deeply disturbed, self-harming woman. Marcus read the post over my shoulder, his jaw clenching so tightly I could hear his teeth grind together. "This is character assassination," he said, his voice laced with disgust. "She is creating a completely false medical history for you just to cover your father's tracks. I should call a lawyer and issue a cease and desist immediately." I shook my head, my eyes never leaving the screen. "Let her dig the hole," I replied softly. "The deeper she digs, the harder it will be for her to climb out." 10 minutes later, the second attack arrived. My encrypted work email pinged with an incoming message. It was a formal cancellation notice from a mid-level retail corporation. They were terminating a minor data management contract they had held with my public-facing freelance LLC for over 2 years. It was not a significant loss financially, but the message itself was deeply significant. Harper was openly copied on the email chain. A moment later, Harper sent me a direct private text message. "I saw that your little freelance contract with the Sterling Group was abruptly terminated this morning. I told their board of directors that you were taking an indefinite leave of absence to deal with your psychiatric episode. Do not worry, Zuri. I will personally manage their public relations account while you are recovering. Consider it a warning. Play along with the narrative, or I will ensure you lose every single client you have left. Get well soon." She was flexing her social muscles, showing me that she could effortlessly reach into my professional life and snatch away my livelihood. She thought she was crushing a helpless bug. She had absolutely no idea she had just kicked a sleeping dragon. I did not respond to her text. I did not retaliate on social media. I simply closed the email application, took a calm sip of my tea, and opened my cybersecurity firm's primary surveillance dashboard. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, sitting beside me and watching the rapid streams of data begin to populate on my screen. "I am watching the clock." I answered, my voice steady and cold. "Harper thinks she is an untouchable queen because she sits on a few charity boards and knows the right people at the country club. She thinks her wealth shields her from consequences. But the Internal Revenue Service does not care about country club memberships. And they definitely do not care about Instagram followers." I had spent the entire night compiling the vast trove of financial evidence I had gathered from Harper's internal servers. I had mapped out exactly how she was funneling tax-exempt charity donations through dummy corporations and straight into her personal offshore accounts. I had bundled the wire transfer receipts, the forged invoices, and her own incriminating emails into an airtight digital dossier. I had forwarded the entire package to the lead investigator of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division just before dawn. Now it was 9:45 in the morning. I tapped a few keys, accessing the live encrypted feed of Harper's personal financial endpoints. I had shadowed her banking app months ago, allowing me to see her transactions in real time. "Where is she right now?" Marcus asked, his eyes tracking a map that had popped up on the corner of my screen. "She is at the Phipps Plaza Luxury Shopping Center," I noted, watching a GPS ping register at one of the highest-end retail stores in the city. "She is celebrating her perceived victory. She thinks she just put me in my place, so she is rewarding herself with a shopping spree." We sat in absolute silence watching the transaction log. At exactly 10:15, a pending charge appeared on the screen. It was a transaction at the Hermes boutique for $18,500. Harper was buying a Birkin bag to soothe the stress of covering up her father's violent assault. The charge remained in a pending state for 3 agonizingly long seconds. Then the text turned a harsh glowing red. The word "declined" flashed across the log. Marcus let out a sharp breath. "Did you freeze her cards?" I shook my head, my eyes locked on the monitor. "No, I did not do anything. The federal government did." A second charge appeared on the screen, this time from a different platinum credit card. Harper was undoubtedly standing at the marble checkout counter, laughing off the decline as a simple banking error and handing the cashier a different card. Declined. A third attempt. A black invitation-only corporate card linked directly to her public relations firm. Declined. Account frozen. I could perfectly picture the scene unfolding in the pristine luxury boutique. The immediate confusion, the sudden creeping embarrassment as the impeccably dressed sales associate handed the useless plastic back to her. The hushed whispers of the other wealthy patrons watching the prominent socialite experience the ultimate high society humiliation of being unable to pay. Simultaneously, a separate window on my laptop flared to life. It was an intercepted feed from the security cameras positioned inside the lobby of Harper's downtown corporate office. "Watch this," I instructed Marcus, pointing at the live video stream. At exactly 10:20, the glass double doors of Harper's boutique public relations firm were violently thrown open. A team of 12 men and women wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters IRSCID printed across their backs swarmed into the elegant reception area. The front desk receptionist jumped to her feet in absolute terror, dropping her phone as the federal agents immediately bypassed her desk and spread out across the office floor. They were carrying empty cardboard banker's boxes and rolls of bright red tamper evidence tape. I watched in cold, silent satisfaction as the agents began seizing computer towers, pulling files from the locked cabinets, and forcing Harper's elite staff to step away from their workstations. The raid was precise, aggressive, and entirely devastating. My laptop speakers crackled to life as an incoming call intercepted Harper's voicemail server. I routed the audio directly to my speakers. It was Harper's senior assistant, and she sounded hysterical. "Harper, you need to get here right now!" The assistant screamed into the phone, the sound of federal agents shouting orders echoing loudly in the background. "The IRS is here. They are everywhere. They are taking the servers. They just handed me a federal warrant for tax evasion, wire fraud, and grand larceny. They said all of your accounts have been federally seized. Harper, please pick up the phone. They are asking where you are. They are sending agents to the mall to find you." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. Marcus stared at the screen, completely mesmerized by the absolute destruction unfolding in real time. He looked from the security footage of the federal raid back to the transaction log, which showed a frantic, desperate flurry of declined credit card attempts. As Harper clearly tried to book a flight, rent a car, or secure a hotel room, every single avenue of escape was locked. "She has no money, no firm, and no reputation," I said, leaning back against the sofa cushions. "The federal agents will find her in the middle of that luxury shopping mall, stripped of all her power, and they will read her rights in front of everyone she knows." I reached out and gently closed the laptop, letting the screen go black. The silence in our apartment felt different now. It was no longer tense or fearful. It was the sound of a slate being wiped clean. "That was for calling me a failure," I whispered, feeling the first genuine smile reach my eyes in days. "Now it is time to deal with Jerome." The shockwaves of Harper's federal indictment and the shadow fund's sudden loan denial hit my father's empire like a synchronized earthquake. Jerome was instantly paralyzed, trapped in endless emergency meetings with panicked lawyers and fleeing shareholders. But the true danger of a collapsing dynasty is how the surviving parasites scramble to secure a new host. My younger sister Chloe, the perpetually pampered golden child, suddenly realized her bottomless trust fund was evaporating into thin air. Her entire identity and future survival were tethered to her upcoming highly publicized engagement to Julian Vance. Julian was the sole heir to a massive international shipping conglomerate, and his conservative family possessed the exact kind of liquid capital Jerome desperately needed to avoid federal bankruptcy. Chloe needed Julian's ring to maintain her lavish lifestyle, and my father needed the Vance family's money to save his sinking ship. Chloe, poisoned by a lifetime of unchecked narcissism, genuinely believed she was invincible. In her twisted reality, my sudden display of power was just a temporary annoyance. She decided the fastest way to break my spirit and regain total control over the family dynamic was to destroy the one thing I valued above all else. She targeted Marcus. I was sitting at my kitchen island, monitoring the rapid implosion of Jerome's corporate stocks, when my phone vibrated with a secure text from Marcus. He was at the hospital finishing his morning rounds. "Your sister just demanded an emergency consultation in the VIP diagnostic wing," his message read. She is claiming the arm injury from the patio is causing severe nerve damage, and she specifically requested me. I am calling hospital security to have her escorted off the premises. I smiled, setting my coffee mug down on the granite counter. Chloe was incredibly predictable. Do not kick her out yet, I typed back, my fingers flying across the screen. Let her into the consultation room. Do not touch her, keep your distance, and let her perform her little routine. I will handle the rest. I immediately opened a new terminal on my laptop and engaged my firm's backdoor access protocols. Medical facilities possess some of the tightest cybersecurity measures in the world, but I had designed the specific firewall architecture for Marcus's hospital network 3 years ago. I slipped past the encrypted defense barriers like a ghost, directly accessing the high-definition security cameras in the VIP diagnostic wing. While federal laws strictly prohibited cameras inside active patient examination rooms, the luxury consultation lounges where doctors discussed treatment plans with high-profile clients were fully equipped with discreet, top-tier audiovisual recording systems for liability and security purposes. I pulled up the live feed for Lounge 4. The footage was crystal clear, capturing both video and pristine audio. Chloe was sitting on a plush leather sofa looking absolutely flawless. She wore a tight silk designer blouse and an expression of manufactured innocence. The heavy wooden door clicked open and Marcus walked in. He did not sit down. He stood near the door, his posture rigid and clinically detached, holding a digital tablet. State the exact nature of your medical emergency, Miss Wilson, Marcus said, his voice completely devoid of any warmth. Chloe immediately dropped the Injured Victim Act. A sly, predatory smile spread across her face. She stood up slowly, walking toward him, swaying her hips with calculated precision. You and I both know my arm is perfectly fine, Marcus. She purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I came here because I feel terrible about what happened at the house. I want to make it up to you. Marcus did not move a single inch. You can make it up to me by leaving this hospital immediately. Chloe laughed, stepping uncomfortably close to him. Why are you settling for Zuri? She whispered, reaching out to trace the lapel of his white medical coat. She is cold, Marcus. She is broken. She is just using you to get back at my father. You are a brilliant, handsome surgeon. You deserve someone who actually knows how to treat a man with your status. Someone like me. As she spoke, Chloe deliberately reached up and unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of her silk blouse, exposing a scandalous amount of skin. She leaned forward, pressing herself aggressively against his chest, tilting her head back, offering herself to him in a desperate, pathetic display of seduction. Marcus stepped backward with explosive speed, looking at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. His hands remained raised, ensuring he never made physical contact with her. You disgust me, Marcus stated, his voice ringing with absolute contempt. You are a shallow, manipulative child playing games with adults. If you ever approach me again, I will have you arrested for harassment. Get out of my hospital. The rejection hit Chloe like a physical blow. Her seductive smile twisted into a mask of humiliated rage. Her face turned an ugly, blotchy red. She hastily fumbled with her buttons, grabbing her designer handbag from the sofa. You will regret this, she snarled, her voice shrill and unhinged. She stormed out of the consultation lounge, but the security feed from the main hallway captured her next move. Before stepping into the public waiting area, Chloe deliberately pulled her blouse wide open again. She violently messed up her perfectly styled hair and forced tears to well up in her eyes. She walked past the nurse's station looking thoroughly traumatized, playing the role of the victimized woman to absolute perfection. Within 20 minutes, the rumors began circulating. I watched my social media monitoring software light up with rapid activity. Chloe had immediately retreated to her car and began mass texting Julian Vance and her elite social circle. She claimed that she had gone to the hospital to apologize on behalf of the family, and that Marcus had aggressively cornered her, locked the door, and tried to force himself on her. She painted him as a violent, obsessive predator who was using me as a cover. She was trying to poison Marcus's reputation and simultaneously force Julian to step in as her valiant, wealthy protector. It was a beautifully vicious lie designed to destroy 2 lives with a single stone. Unfortunately for Chloe, she had unknowingly performed her little play directly in front of an ultra-high-definition security lens. I extracted the full, unedited video and audio file from the hospital server. The footage showed the absolute, undeniable truth. It displayed Chloe faking her injury aggressively, throwing herself at a taken man, actively unbuttoning her own shirt, and being summarily rejected and thrown out. I did not post the video on social media. I did not engage in a public, messy war of words. That was how amateurs fought. I targeted the exact foundation of her entire future. Julian Vance's family demanded absolute perfection from anyone marrying into their billionaire dynasty. They abhorred scandals, cheap drama, and unstable behavior. Julian was completely infatuated with Chloe's carefully crafted image of innocence and class. I drafted a single highly secure email. In the recipient field, I placed Julian Vance's private address. In the carbon copy field, I added Julian's mother, a notoriously strict matriarch who controlled the Vance Family Trust Fund, and the senior partners of Julian's corporate law firm. The subject line was simple and professional: urgent due diligence regarding Chloe Wilson. I did not include a long emotional explanation. I simply attached the crisp, high-definition video file directly to the email. I added a single sentence to the body of the message. The Vance family deserves to know the exact nature of the woman entering their household before any binding legal or financial commitments are finalized. I hit send. I sat back and watched the delivery receipts confirm that the file had reached the Vance family's private servers. I knew exactly what was happening in their sprawling mansion across town. I knew Julian's mother would open the email first. I knew she would watch the undeniable footage of her prospective daughter-in-law actively trying to seduce another woman's fiancé in a hospital room, then faking an assault to cover her tracks. 45 minutes later, my tracking software intercepted a massive spike in activity on Jerome's corporate servers. Julian Vance's legal team had formally severed all communications with my father's holding company. The much-anticipated engagement announcement was abruptly canceled, and the life-saving capital injection from the Vance family was permanently withdrawn. Chloe's phone began ringing off the hook, but not with messages of support. Julian had blocked her number across all platforms. His mother had issued a silent, lethal decree across their social circle, effectively blacklisting Chloe from every elite country club and charity gala in the state. She had tried to steal my future with a cheap, desperate lie. In response, I had taken the unedited truth and used it to burn her golden ticket to absolute ashes. With Harper facing federal prison and Chloe permanently exiled from high society, Jerome was completely isolated. The shield of his perfect, untouchable family had been utterly demolished. He was standing alone in the ruins of his empire, waiting for the final blow. The financial execution of Jerome Wilson required a completely different kind of precision. My father did not care about public opinion, and he certainly did not care about the emotional devastation of his daughters. The only language Jerome spoke was capital, and the only pain he could truly feel was the loss of his net worth. I routed the audio feed from the executive boardroom of his corporate headquarters directly to my laptop speakers. For the past 2 hours, the room had been a war zone. I listened as Jerome screamed at his chief financial officer, hurling heavy glass paperweights against the mahogany-paneled walls. The $5 million loan extension had been officially denied by the automated clearinghouses. My shadow fund had officially categorized his primary holding company as delinquent. The dominoes were falling exactly as I had modeled them. "Call Harper!" Jerome bellowed, his voice distorted by panic and rage. "Tell her to leverage her charity board connections. We need a quiet bridge loan from one of her foundation accounts by noon, or the banks will freeze the payroll accounts." "Sir!" The CFO replied, his voice trembling so violently it barely registered on the microphone. "We cannot reach Harper. The federal authorities raided her office an hour ago. Her personal and corporate assets have been seized by the IRS. She is currently in federal custody." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the boardroom. I could almost hear the gears grinding in my father's head as he realized his primary money laundering avenue had just been vaporized. "Then get Chloe on the line." Jerome snapped, the desperation creeping into his tone. "Tell her to expedite the wedding announcements." Have Julian Vance's wealth management team wire the advance engagement capital immediately. Tell them it is a gesture of good faith. Sir, the CFO whimpered again. Julian Vance's legal team sent over a formal termination of relationship notice 20 minutes ago. The engagement is entirely off. They cited a severe breach of moral clauses. Chloe is unreachable. Jerome was entirely isolated. The impenetrable fortress he had built around himself using his golden children had crumbled into dust in less than 3 hours. He had no cash, no credit, and no allies. There is only one option left, Jerome muttered, the sound of him pacing heavily across the hardwood floor, transmitting through my speakers. Get the Overseas Investment Group on the phone. The ones who bought up our toxic debt last quarter. They are the only players with enough liquid capital to stop this default. I will offer them whatever they want. I smiled, my fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for. I opened a secure, encrypted communication channel to Elias Thorne. Elias was a ruthless, brilliant corporate attorney based in Geneva. He was the legally appointed proxy for my private equity fund, the terrifying public face of the shadow corporation I controlled from the shadows. He is calling you right now, Elias, I typed into the secure chat window. Execute the final protocol. Play hardball. Understood, Elias replied instantly. I merged the audio feeds, allowing Marcus and me to listen to the private phone call between my father and the man he believed was his financial savior. Mr. Thorne! Jerome began forcing his voice into a tone of false, booming confidence. We seem to have hit a slight administrative snag this morning with a minor domestic creditor. I need a rapid capital injection to smooth over the transition. $20 million wired directly to our primary corporate account within the hour. Jerome Wilson. Elias replied, his tone smooth, cultured, and entirely unimpressed. A $20 million emergency wire transfer is not a minor administrative snag. It is a distress signal. My analysts are looking at your current portfolio. You are currently defaulting on a massive scale. Your subsidiaries are bleeding cash. Why should my partners throw good money into a burning building? Jerome let out a nervous, wheezing laugh. It is just a temporary cash flow issue, Elias. I have assets. I have collateral. I will put up my remaining 20% equity in the entire holding company. I will throw in the deed to my residential estate. My private mansion in the hills is worth at least $10 million clear. Take it all as collateral. Just send the wire. I could hear the frantic sweat in Jerome's voice. He was throwing his entire life onto the poker table, entirely convinced he could win it back once the dust settled. He was an arrogant gambler who had never truly lost, and he refused to believe his luck had run out. My partners require absolute security, Mr. Wilson, Elias countered smoothly, following my exact script. If we are going to assume this level of risk, we require total operational control. We will authorize the $20 million transfer, but we require you to sign an unconditional power of attorney regarding your corporate shares and your pledged personal assets. We hold the reins until the debt is cleared. Send the contract, Jerome demanded immediately. Sir, my legal team needs to review a document of that magnitude. The CFO interrupted in the background, his voice frantic. An unconditional power of attorney is corporate suicide. You cannot sign that without a full review period. Shut up! Jerome roared, the sound of his hand slamming against the boardroom table echoing loudly. We do not have time for a 3-day legal review. If the markets close and we are still in default, the company is dead. I built this empire. I know what I am doing. Send the document, Elias. A notification pinged on my screen. Elias had transmitted the contract. It was a masterpiece of legal deception. I had spent months drafting the specific clauses, burying them deep within pages of dense, mind-numbing financial boilerplate. Jerome despised reading fine print. He fancied himself a big-picture visionary, a titan of industry who left the boring details to his subordinates. But today his subordinates were terrified and the clock was ticking. The contract did not just give my shadow fund control over his shares as collateral, it contained a catastrophic acceleration clause. It stated that if Jerome was currently under investigation for any violent criminal acts or if he possessed any undisclosed liabilities, the entire $20 million loan would instantly mature and become payable in full immediately. It also granted the proxy the irrevocable right to liquidate all pledged assets, including his company and his home, without any further judicial review. I watched the live digital signature tracking software on my monitor. Jerome had opened the document. He was scrolling rapidly, bypassing 70 pages of intricate, lethal legal traps in less than a minute. He was not reading a single word. He was just looking for the signature line. "He is going to do it," Marcus whispered, leaning forward, his eyes locked on the glowing progress bar. "He is actually going to sign it blind." "Arrogance is the ultimate blindfold," I replied softly, my heart beating with a steady, victorious rhythm. "He thinks he is tricking them. He thinks he will just take the money today and tie them up in expensive litigation tomorrow if they try to enforce the collateral. He still thinks he is the smartest man in the room." The progress bar hit 100%, a green digital seal stamped across the screen. Jerome had signed the document. The biometric verification confirmed his identity. The unconditional power of attorney was now a legally binding, irreversible federal contract. "I have your signature," Mr. Wilson Elias Thorne stated over the audio feed, his voice chillingly polite. "The funds are being released now. Have a pleasant afternoon." The line went dead. In the boardroom, Jerome let out a massive, triumphant sigh of relief. He began bragging to his terrified CFO, boasting about how he had successfully bullied the overseas investors into giving him exactly what he wanted. He was gloating. He was completely oblivious to the noose that had just snapped tight around his neck. I immediately routed the $20 million wire transfer from my shadow fund directly into Jerome's corporate account. The money landed, triggering a wave of automated clearance notifications. For exactly 60 seconds, Jerome was a wealthy, successful titan once again. Then I executed the final command. I uploaded the hospital security footage of Chloe's violent, unhinged behavior, the documented proof of Harper's federal indictment, and the high-resolution photographs of the severe facial injuries Jerome had inflicted upon me, complete with Marcus's signed medical affidavits. I uploaded everything directly to the encrypted portal of the Shadow Fund, officially flagging Jerome Wilson as a high-risk criminal liability. The automated acceleration clause in the contract instantly activated. Because Jerome had concealed severe criminal liabilities and ongoing federal investigations within his immediate family structure, the $20 million loan immediately defaulted. My fingers moved with lethal grace as I engaged the asset liquidation protocols. By signing the unconditional power of attorney, Jerome had entirely bypassed the court system. I did not need a judge's permission. I did not need a foreclosure hearing. I initiated the corporate takeover. I legally transferred Jerome's remaining 20% equity stake directly into my shadow fund. I was now the absolute, undisputed majority shareholder of Wilson Manufacturing and Real Estate. Then I initiated the property seizure. I transferred the deed of the $10 million Wilson family mansion into a blind trust that I controlled. The entire process took less than 3 minutes. On the audio feed, the celebratory mood in the boardroom abruptly shattered. "Sir!" the CFO screamed, his voice breaking into a panicked sob. "The funds! The $20 million! It just bounced back out of the account." "What are you talking about?" Jerome demanded. "The overseas fund triggered an automatic default clause," the CFO cried out. "Sir, they just exercised the power of attorney. They seized your shares. They seized the house. You do not own the company anymore. You do not own anything." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a man realizing he had just stepped off a cliff and there was no net waiting to catch him. Jerome began to hyperventilate, the sound of his panicked, ragged breathing echoing through the empty corporate suite. He had traded his entire kingdom for a temporary illusion of safety. I reached out and ended the audio feed, cutting off my father's pathetic, whimpering gasps. I looked at the master dashboard on my screen. The Wilson family empire was officially gone, reduced to a collection of seized assets and federal indictments. "It is done," I said, turning to look at Marcus. The exhaustion was finally catching up to me, but my mind felt incredibly clear. "The monsters are dead." Marcus let out a slow, deeply respectful breath. He pulled me gently against his chest, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. avoiding my bruised face. "You survived them, Zuri," he murmured into my hair. "You beat them all." I closed my eyes, resting my head against his steady, beating heart. I had spent my entire life hiding in the shadows, pretending to be small, pretending to be weak, just to survive their endless cruelty. They had taken my childhood, they had stolen my peace, and they had nearly broken my spirit. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had taught me how to operate in the dark, and they had never once realized that the dark was exactly where dragons learned how to breathe fire. The peaceful sanctuary of our apartment was finally broken late the following afternoon. I had slept for 14 solid hours, my body and mind finally releasing the toxic tension I had carried since childhood. Marcus was at the hospital completing his surgical rotations, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of my computer servers. I was reviewing the final beautiful logs of Jerome's corporate liquidation when my phone screen lit up with a demand I had actually been anticipating. It was my mother. Beatrice did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about the severe facial injuries her husband had inflicted upon me. Her text message was a cold, absolute command. It ordered me to meet her immediately at the Astor Room, the ultra-exclusive dining club located inside the city's most expensive luxury hotel. I changed into a sharp-tailored suit covering the fading bruises on my cheek with a thin layer of cosmetic foundation, and drove downtown. I knew exactly why she wanted to see me. The delusion of the extremely wealthy is a stubborn terminal disease. Even as the federal government dismantled her family's empire brick by brick, Beatrice firmly believed that money and social manipulation could simply rewrite reality. When I arrived at the Astor Room, the maitre d' escorted me to a secluded corner booth. Beatrice was sitting rigidly upright, gripping the stem of a crystal champagne flute. On the surface, she looked immaculate. Her hair was perfectly styled, her diamonds caught the ambient light, and her designer dress was flawless. But beneath the heavy layer of expensive makeup, she was cracking. Her eyes darted around the room with a frantic, hunted energy. She was terrified that her high society peers would sense the stench of her family's sudden financial death. "Sit down, Zuri," she commanded, not bothering to offer a greeting. "We have a family crisis to manage, and I do not have time for your usual difficult attitude." I slid into the velvet booth, folding my hands neatly on the pristine white tablecloth. "I am listening," I replied softly. Beatrice took a large, uncharacteristic gulp of her champagne. "There has been a ridiculous misunderstanding with the banks today." She began, her voice tight and defensive. "Your father is dealing with some temporary freezing of our primary accounts. It is a minor clerical error, but it is happening at the absolute worst possible time. Chloe's engagement to Julian Vance has hit a rough patch." "A rough patch," I repeated, suppressing the urge to smile. I knew exactly what kind of rough patch she meant. Julian's billionaire mother had likely threatened to disinherit him if he ever spoke to Chloe again. Julian's family is being terribly dramatic over some malicious edited video circulating among their circle, Beatrice said, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "They are demanding space. But I know how these people operate, Zuri. The Vances are obsessed with public image. The only way to fix this and force them back to the table is to remind them of our status. I am throwing Chloe $1 million engagement gala this weekend. I have already reserved the grand ballroom here at the hotel. It will be the social event of the decade. Once the media publishes the photos, the Vances will have no choice but to reconcile to avoid looking foolish." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the sheer scale of her delusion. She actually believed she could throw a party to fix a federal bankruptcy and a ruined reputation. She thought champagne and caviar would make Julian Vance forget that her daughter had just tried to aggressively seduce a surgeon in a hospital diagnostic wing. "If your accounts are frozen, how do you plan to pay for $1 million gala?" I asked, keeping my tone entirely conversational. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "That is why you are here. I need a cash infusion to clear the deposits by 5 o'clock today. $100,000. You run that little computer business of yours, and you have virtually no living expenses. I know you have it." I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. "You want me to empty my savings to fund a party for the sister who has spent her entire life tormenting me?" "It is not a request, Zuri," She snapped the polished society mother facade, dropping entirely to reveal the vicious predator underneath. It is repayment. We put a roof over your head. We fed you. We allowed you to exist in our home despite you being a constant miserable disappointment. You owe us this debt and you will pay it today. I leaned back against the plush velvet looking at her with absolute calm. And if I refuse? Beatrice smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. If you refuse, I will make a single phone call to the police commissioner. Your father is currently sitting at home with severe bruising and lacerations all over his face and hands. We will file a formal police report stating that your unstable, violent boyfriend Marcus attacked Jerome completely unprovoked. We will say Marcus ambushed him on our patio. Who do you think the authorities will believe, a prominent, wealthy real estate developer or an arrogant young surgeon with a history of aggressive behavior? She was blackmailing me. She was actively using the very injuries Jerome had sustained while trying to murder me as a weapon to destroy the man I loved. She had completely fabricated a narrative where Marcus was the violent aggressor, and she was entirely prepared to ruin his medical license and send him to prison just to secure party funds for her golden child. I looked deeply into my mother's eyes, searching for even a microscopic trace of maternal affection or basic human decency. There was nothing there. It was just a black, hollow void of greed and self-preservation. You are right, I said softly, reaching into my tailored jacket to retrieve my slim leather checkbook. Marcus has a brilliant career ahead of him. I would hate for a misunderstanding to ruin his reputation. Beatrice let out a sharp, triumphant sigh, leaning back in her chair. I knew you would finally see reason. You were always a stubborn child, but you eventually fold when you realize you have no leverage. Make the check out to the luxury event planning group. I uncapped my heavy silver pen. I did not write the check from my personal cybersecurity business account. I wrote the check from a highly specific, heavily monitored routing number. When I had seized Jerome's assets through the Shadow Fund earlier that morning, Elias Thorne had established a temporary centralized holding ledger. This ledger was directly linked to Jerome's defaulted federal debt profile. Any capital transferred into or out of this specific account was legally classified as a highly restricted federal asset. I filled out the exact amount, $100,000, and signed my name with a smooth, practiced flourish. I ripped the paper from the booklet and slid it across the white tablecloth. Beatrice snatched the check with greedy, manicured fingers, examining the amount with profound satisfaction. She did not even look at the routing numbers. She did not care where the money came from as long as it served her purpose. She carefully folded the check and slipped it into her designer handbag. You made the smart choice today, Zuri, she said, her voice returning to its usual condescending tone. Perhaps there is hope for you yet. I will make sure the police commissioner ignores the unfortunate incident with your father. Do not expect an invitation to the gala, however. We need to maintain a certain aesthetic for the photographs, and your current facial bruising is simply too distracting. She stood up, tossing a $50 bill onto the table to cover her champagne, and walked away without looking back. I sat alone in the Astor room, watching her elegant figure disappear through the glass doors. I reached for my phone and opened my encrypted communication channel to Elias Thorne in Geneva. The bait has been taken, I typed. Elias responded immediately. I am monitoring the holding ledger now. Once she deposits that check and transfers the funds to the event planners, how would you like to proceed? Under federal bankruptcy laws, it is a severe criminal offense to deliberately dissipate, hide, or spend restricted financial assets prior to a formal corporate liquidation. Beatrice was about to take $100,000 of federally frozen collateral and spend it on ice sculptures, caviar, and luxury floral arrangements for a doomed engagement party. When the transaction clears, I instructed Elias forward the expenditure receipts directly to the bankruptcy court and the federal prosecutors currently holding Harper. Classify the transaction as criminal asset dissipation and deliberate bankruptcy fraud. Understood, Elias replied. The trap is armed. I pocketed my phone and stood up, walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight. Beatrice wanted to save face. She wanted to throw the party of the century to prove to the world that her family was still untouchable. She was going to get exactly what she wanted. She would have her grand $1 million ballroom. She would have her custom floral arrangements and her imported champagne. She would stand in the center of the room waiting for Julian Vance and his billionaire parents to walk through the doors and beg for forgiveness. But the Vances were never going to show up. The only people walking through those grand ballroom doors would be federal agents holding handcuffs and a criminal warrant for Beatrice's immediate arrest. She had demanded that I repay her for raising me. I had just paid my debt in full, and the receipt was going to cost her absolutely everything. I did not need to leave the comfort of my living room to witness the grotesque celebration taking place across the city. 3 years ago, Jerome had insisted on upgrading the family estate with a state-of-the-art military-grade smart home automation system. He wanted to control the lighting, the climate, and the integrated security cameras from his smartphone so he could feel like the omnipotent master of his domain. I was the one who had installed and configured the network for him. Naturally, I had woven an invisible permanent backdoor access code directly into the master framework. I connected my laptop to the television screen mounted on our living room wall, casting the live high-definition surveillance feed from the mansion's grand parlor. Marcus handed me a fresh cup of tea and sat beside me, his eyes fixed on the display. It was like watching a psychological study of pure unfiltered delusion. Jerome, Beatrice, and Chloe were gathered around the massive marble fireplace. The sheer arrogance radiating from them was palpable. They were completely insulated in their bubble of wealth, willfully ignoring the catastrophic reality that was already suffocating them. Jerome stood by the crystal decanters, pouring himself a generous measure of 50-year-old scotch. He was sweating slightly, his face still bearing the faint purple swelling from when he had attacked me, but his posture was puffed up with manufactured triumph. He had spent the afternoon screaming at his chief financial officer, firing the man for daring to suggest the company had been seized. In Jerome's twisted narcissistic reality, the terrifying default notices and the bounced wire transfers were simply automated banking errors. He had convinced himself that the $20 million overseas loan was secured the moment he signed the paperwork, and any technical glitches would be smoothed over by morning. He refused to believe he could be outsmarted. "I played those European suits perfectly," Jerome boasted, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "They thought they could hold my feet to the fire with their ridiculous collateral demands. But I secured the $20 million. The banking clearinghouses are just dragging their feet on the international conversion rate. By tomorrow morning, the payroll accounts will be flushed with cash, and we will be completely untouchable again." He raised his glass in a toast to his own reflection in the mirror above the mantel. "I saved this family today." Beatrice sat on a velvet chaise lounge, her posture rigidly triumphant. She reached into her designer handbag and dramatically pulled out the paper check I had written her at the Astor Room. She held it up between her manicured fingers like a captured enemy flag. "And I secured the immediate operating capital," Beatrice announced, a vicious smirk playing on her lips. $100,000 extracted directly from our miserable, ungrateful daughter." Chloe, who was aggressively scrolling through floral arrangements on her digital tablet, looked up with a sharp, mocking laugh. "You actually got Zuri to pay for my engagement gala. How did you manage that?" "The girl is incredibly cheap." "It was wonderfully easy," Beatrice replied, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. "I simply reminded her of her place. I told her that if she did not fund your party, I would have the police commissioner arrest her little surgeon boyfriend for assaulting your father." "You should have seen her face, Chloe." She folded instantly. "She is weak. She has absolutely no backbone. She handed over her life savings just to protect him." They laughed together. It was a cold, synchronized sound that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings of the parlor. They were reveling in their perceived dominance, entirely unaware that the piece of paper Beatrice was waving around was a one-way ticket to a federal indictment. "She is so pathetic," Chloe sneered, tossing her tablet onto the coffee table. "She honestly thinks she can just live in this city and pretend to be our equal." "Julian is still ignoring my calls, but once he sees the scale of the gala we are throwing this weekend, he will realize he cannot walk away from this family. The Vances respect power. When they see the guest list and the sheer amount of money we are spending, Julian's mother will force him to apologize to me." Chloe actually believed it. She believed that spending the very money her mother had extorted from me would somehow erase the security footage of her throwing herself at Marcus. She believed Julian Vance was simply throwing a temporary tantrum, and that a grand party would magically repair her shattered reputation. We cannot allow Zuri to remain in Atlanta after the wedding, Jerome said, his voice dropping into a harsh, authoritative register. He walked over and stood beside Beatrice, looking down at the check. She has become a severe liability. Her very presence is a constant irritation. The fact that she would dare to talk back to us to defy this family shows that she has completely lost her mind. I agree entirely. Beatrice nodded, her eyes flashing with malice. She is a stain on our social standing. Once Chloe is officially married and the Vance family capital is fully integrated into our accounts, we are going to excise Zuri completely. How do we get rid of her? Chloe asked, her eyes gleaming with eager malice. She will not just leave. She has that stupid cybersecurity business here. We will force her out, Beatrice stated smoothly, as if discussing nothing more than taking out the trash. We still hold the leverage over Marcus's medical license. We will simply tell Zuri that she has exactly 1 week to liquidate her business, pack her bags, and move to another state. If she refuses, we destroy his career. We will run them both out of Georgia. They will be blacklisted from every hospital and corporate firm in the Southeast. Jerome chuckled, taking another long drink of his scotch. It is the perfect solution. We drain her bank accounts to pay for our immediate needs, and then we banish her. She will have absolutely nothing left. She will finally understand what happens when you disrespect the people who gave you life. Marcus shifted on the sofa beside me. I could feel the heat of his anger radiating through his shoulder where it pressed against mine. He looked at the television screen, watching my family casually plot to destroy our entire lives over a glass of evening champagne. They are monsters, Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. They are sitting in a house they do not even own anymore. Drinking scotch they can no longer afford, plotting to ruin us with money that is going to send them to federal prison. It is almost difficult to comprehend how deeply sick they are. I reached for the remote control and muted the audio feed. The silent image of my family toasting their imaginary victory continued to play on the screen. They operate on the absolute belief that they are the authors of reality. I explained quietly, my eyes tracing the familiar architecture of the parlor. My father believes he is a king. My mother believes she is a queen. Chloe believes she is a princess. When you live your entire life surrounded by people who are paid to tell you that you are royalty, you forget how to recognize a guillotine. I pulled my laptop onto my lap and opened the master control terminal for the Shadow Fund. They wanted to plan my exile tonight, I murmured, highlighting a series of highly sensitive financial and legal directives. I think it is only fair that I finalize theirs. The trap was already fully armed, but I needed to ensure that the execution was flawless. I checked the status of the restricted federal holding account. Beatrice had not wasted a single second. Just before the banks closed for the evening, she had used her mobile application to deposit my $100,000 check. 30 minutes later, she had wired $85,000 directly to the premier luxury event planning agency in the city, locking in the grand ballroom at the Astor Room and securing the imported orchids Chloe had demanded. By initiating that wire transfer, Beatrice had officially crossed the threshold from unethical extortion into documented, undeniable bankruptcy fraud. I sent a secure single-character encrypted ping to Elias Thorne in Geneva. It was the green light. Elias immediately forwarded the complete, heavily documented ledger of Beatrice's fraudulent transaction directly to the United States Bankruptcy Court and the active federal prosecutors handling Harper's ongoing criminal case. The evidence was irrefutable. Beatrice Wilson had knowingly taken restricted, federally frozen corporate collateral and intentionally dissipated it to fund a personal, lavish party. At the exact same time, I executed the final property mandate. When Jerome signed the unconditional power of attorney that morning, the Shadow Fund had legally absorbed all of his pledged assets. That included the deed to the sprawling $10 million mansion they were currently drinking in. I did not just want to evict them. I wanted them to feel the precise, humiliating terror of being thrown out into the street. I drafted a formal, legally binding notice of immediate seizure and eviction. I stamped it with the official seal of the Overseas Investment Proxy. I commanded the digital system to transmit the eviction notice directly to the mobile devices of every single person in the mansion. But I did not stop there. I accessed the smart home automation framework that Jerome loved so much. I set a timer for exactly 6 o'clock the following morning. When the clock struck 6, the smart home system would automatically lock every exterior door and window from the inside. The integrated security alarms would blare at their maximum decibel level, creating a deafening, inescapable siren that would echo through every marble hallway. The climate control would instantly shut down. The electronic gates at the end of the driveway would lock permanently, and a hired team of aggressive armed private security contractors would arrive at the front door to physically escort Jerome, Beatrice, and Chloe off the premises. They would not be allowed to pack a bag. They would not be allowed to take their jewelry, their designer clothing, or their expensive scotch. They would be forced out onto the pavement with nothing but the clothes on their backs right as the morning news networks broke the story of their total financial collapse. I finalized the sequence and hit the execute command. The data packet vanished into the network, silently embedding itself into the mansion's mainframe. I looked up at the television screen. Jerome was laughing, wrapping his arm around Beatrice's waist. Chloe was smiling brightly, holding up her tablet to show them a picture of a massive multi-tiered engagement cake. They looked so happy. They looked so incredibly safe. "Enjoy your final night in my house," I whispered to the screen. "Because tomorrow you are going to learn exactly what it means to be a failure." The Astor Room's grand ballroom was a monument to financial hemorrhage. Beatrice had spared no expense using the stolen restricted funds to construct a temporary illusion of total invincibility. 10,000 imported white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceilings like fragrant waterfalls. A 20-foot champagne tower dominated the center of the room, surrounded by Atlanta's corporate elite, local politicians, and a swarm of society journalists. It was a glittering, superficial masterpiece, and I was about to shatter it. I stepped out of Marcus's car at the hotel's valet entrance. I was not wearing my usual muted, invisible corporate attire. I wore a floor-length silk gown the color of freshly spilled blood. It was a vibrant, unapologetic red that demanded the attention of every eye in the room. My hair was swept up into a severe, elegant twist, leaving my neck and face completely exposed. I had scrubbed off every trace of cosmetic foundation. The severe injuries Jerome had inflicted upon me were displayed in stark, high-definition reality. The heavy purple and black swelling around my left eye, the jagged, sutured laceration across my cheekbone, and the yellowing bruises tracing my jawline stood out violently against my skin. It was a horrific portrait of domestic violence framed by expensive silk and diamonds. Marcus offered his arm. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his presence projecting an aura of absolute, immovable strength. We did not sneak through the side doors. We walked directly up the grand marble staircase and approached the main ballroom entrance. The heavy brass-studded oak doors swung open. We stepped onto the ballroom floor. The effect was instantaneous and completely devastating. It began as a localized hush near the entrance, a sudden cessation of laughter and clinking crystal. Then, like a shockwave rolling across the room, the silence spread. Hundreds of heads turned. Atlanta's wealthiest power brokers, socialites, and investors stopped mid-sentence. Their eyes locked onto me. They saw the breathtaking red dress, and then their gazes snapped instantly to my battered, bruised face. The whispers ignited immediately, a harsh, hissing wave of scandalous curiosity that swept through the ballroom. People were pointing behind their champagne flutes. Society journalists, sensing a massive story, subtly unclipped their camera lens caps and began maneuvering through the crowd, their eyes hungry for the truth behind the brutalized face of Jerome Wilson's eldest daughter. Across the room, standing near a towering ice sculpture, Chloe froze. She was wearing a custom pearl-encrusted white gown, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of a happy bride-to-be, despite the glaring absence of Julian Vance. When she saw me, her jaw went slack. Her champagne glass tilted, spilling expensive vintage down the side of her dress. Her perfect million-dollar fantasy had just been invaded by reality. Jerome and Beatrice noticed the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. They turned toward the entrance, following the collective gaze of the crowd. Beatrice let out a sharp, audible gasp, her hand flying to her throat. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Jerome's reaction was entirely different. His face instantly drained of color, then rapidly flooded with a violent mottled crimson. The veins in his thick neck bulged against his silk collar. He realized immediately what I was doing. I was wearing his brutality like a crown in front of the exact people he was trying to impress. He whispered something vicious to Beatrice, then signaled frantically to two massive private security guards stationed near the catering doors. He began marching across the ballroom floor, his heavy footsteps eating up the distance between us. Beatrice hurried after him, her frantic attempts to smile at the staring guests, making her look completely unhinged. I did not move a single inch. I stood my ground, my hand resting lightly on Marcus's arm, my chin raised. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Jerome hissed as he reached us, his voice a low, venomous growl designed to evade the microphones of the approaching reporters. "Get out of here. Now. You are not invited to this event." Beatrice stepped up beside him, her eyes darting nervously toward the flashes of the press cameras. "Are you insane?" she whispered frantically, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "Look at your face. You look like a street brawler. You are ruining your sister's night. I told you specifically to stay away. Turn around and leave before I have you thrown out onto the pavement." I smiled, the movement pulling painfully at the stitches on my cheek. It only made the visual effect more striking. "I paid for this party, Mother," I replied, my voice cool, melodic, and carrying perfectly over the ambient noise of the ballroom. "I funded the orchids, the champagne, and the ice sculptures. I thought I should at least enjoy the hors d'oeuvres before the authorities arrive." Jerome's eyes widened with pure, unfiltered panic. He leaned in his massive frame, attempting to physically intimidate me, his hands balling into tight fists at his sides. "I do not care what delusions you are operating under," he snarled. "You are leaving, now." He raised his hand, gesturing sharply for the two approaching security guards to grab me. Marcus stepped seamlessly between Jerome and me. He did not raise his voice. He did not strike an aggressive posture. He simply stood there, a wall of calculated surgical precision, looking down at my father with an expression of absolute contempt. "Touch her." Marcus stated, his voice a low, lethal baritone that cut through the tension like a scalpel. "And I will have you arrested for felony assault in front of every camera in this room. I have fully documented her injuries. I have the hospital records. Give me a single reason to call the police commissioner right now." Jerome froze. The security guards hesitated, looking between their employer and the towering immaculate surgeon blocking their path. I stepped out from behind Marcus, ensuring the reporters hovering 10 feet away had a clear, unobstructed line of sight to my bruised face. "Think very carefully about your next move, Jerome," I advised softly, my eyes locking onto his. "Look around you. The press is already fascinated by my appearance. If your guards lay a single hand on me, if they drag your battered, bleeding daughter out of this ballroom, those photographs will be on the front page of every major newspaper in the country tomorrow morning. The headline will not be about Chloe's engagement. The headline will ask exactly who beat Jerome Wilson's daughter and why he had her violently removed from a family celebration." Beatrice grabbed Jerome's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. She realized the trap I had set. If they threw me out, they validated the scandal. If they let me stay, I remained a walking, talking billboard of their domestic crimes. They were completely paralyzed. "You are a monster," Beatrice hissed, tears of genuine humiliated rage welling in her eyes. "You are doing this just to destroy us." "No, Mother," I corrected her, my tone entirely devoid of emotion. "I am doing this to introduce you to the real world. You have spent your entire lives operating in a fantasy where your actions have no consequences. You thought you could extort me, steal restricted federal assets, and throw a party to fix a broken empire. I am just here to watch the illusion shatter." I reached over to a passing waiter's silver tray and picked up 2 glasses of vintage champagne. I handed one to Marcus and kept the other for myself. "Do not cause a scene, Mother," I whispered, stepping past her frozen form. "You have guests to entertain, and Julian Vance is still nowhere to be found." How embarrassing for Chloe. Marcus and I walked smoothly past them, gliding directly into the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. I felt the heat of hundreds of stares, the relentless flashing of camera lenses, and the sharp collective intake of breath from the Atlanta elite. I did not shrink away. I held my head high, proudly displaying the violence they had tried to bury. I walked directly to the towering champagne fountain. Chloe was standing just feet away, trembling with a mixture of terror and fury. Her perfect engagement gala was in ruins, hijacked by the sister she had spent a lifetime treating like garbage. I raised my glass toward her, a silent, mocking toast to her crumbling world. Jerome and Beatrice remained stranded near the entrance, entirely powerless to stop me, forced to smile rigidly at the confused investors, asking them questions they could not possibly answer. They were trapped in their own million-dollar cage, suffocating under the weight of the truth I had just dragged into the light. And the best part was, they still had absolutely no idea that the real nightmare was scheduled to begin at exactly 6 o'clock the following morning. Jerome broke from his paralyzed state near the entrance. His survival instinct, honed by decades of corporate bullying, finally kicked in. He realized that silence was a vacuum the press would fill with their own narratives. He needed to control the room. He shoved past a group of startled hedge fund managers and marched directly toward the raised dais, where a string quartet had been playing softly. He stepped onto the stage, violently snatching the microphone from its silver stand. The sudden movement caused a sharp screech of audio feedback to echo through the grand ballroom, instantly silencing the remaining whispers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jerome boomed, his voice layered with a sickeningly false tone of paternal sorrow. "Please accept my deepest apologies for this unfortunate disruption. As many of you in our close circle are aware, my eldest daughter Zuri has been battling severe prolonged mental health instability." He paused, letting out a heavy theatrical sigh, playing the role of the tragic patriarch to absolute perfection. "We have tried everything to get her the psychiatric help she desperately needs," he continued, looking out at the sea of reporters. "Unfortunately, her condition has deteriorated into episodes of self-harm and violent delusions. She arrived here tonight uninvited, attempting to ruin her sister's beautiful celebration. I ask for your compassion and privacy as security escorts her to a medical facility where she can be properly evaluated." He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at me. "Remove her from this premises immediately," he commanded the hotel staff. I did not break eye contact with him. I slowly reached into the pocket of my silk gown and retrieved my smartphone. I did not need to hack the hotel's audio-visual system in real time. I had already compromised the Astor Room's network architecture 3 days ago when Beatrice first booked the venue. I had a dedicated technician, a trusted contractor from my own firm, sitting in the elevated projection booth at the back of the hall. I looked up at the tinted glass of the booth and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The transition was instantaneous. The 6 massive high-definition LED screens, suspended around the perimeter of the ballroom, were supposed to begin playing a romantic, carefully curated photo montage of Chloe and Julian Vance. Instead, the screens abruptly went pitch black. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the sudden darkness contrasted sharply with the glittering chandeliers. Then brilliant white light flooded the room. Displayed in massive, inescapable font across every single screen was the unconditional power of attorney contract. The text was crystal clear. The automated presentation immediately zoomed in on the most lethal clauses, the stipulations regarding total asset forfeiture, the acceleration of debt due to criminal liability, and the immediate surrender of all corporate and personal property. At the very bottom of the document, magnified for every billionaire and journalist in the room to see, was Jerome Wilson's verified biometric signature. Before anyone could fully process the dense legal jargon, the screens transitioned again. This time they displayed the live current banking ledger for Wilson Manufacturing and Real Estate. The account balances were universally read. They read absolute zero. Beside them flashed the official court-stamped notice of immediate seizure and eviction for the Wilson family estate. The ballroom erupted. The silence shattered into a chaotic symphony of camera shutters, shouting reporters, and panicked investors realizing their money was tied to a dead company. Marcus calmly walked over to a secondary presentation podium near the Champagne Tower. He effortlessly lifted the wireless microphone resting on its surface and handed it to me. I clicked the power switch. "Are you really going to evict your most crucial VIP guest, Jerome?" I asked. My voice resonated through the state-of-the-art sound system, easily cutting over the rising panic in the room. Jerome froze on the stage, the microphone dropping uselessly to his side. He stared at the massive screens, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked as though his heart might stop beating. Beatrice let out a strangled, breathless cry, covering her mouth with both hands. I slowly walked forward, closing the distance between the champagne fountain and the stage, ensuring every camera in the room tracked my movement. "You have spent the entire evening attempting to convince Atlanta's elite that your empire is completely secure." I continued, my tone conversational yet ringing with absolute authority. "You told them your international financing was approved. You told them you were untouchable. But you really should have read the fine print before you signed away your life to a shadow fund in Geneva." Jerome stumbled backward, bumping into the microphone stand. "You," he gasped, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "You are the proxy." "Or—" "I am not the proxy. Dad," I corrected him smoothly, coming to a halt just below the stage. "Allow me to formally introduce myself to everyone in this room. My name is Zuri Wilson. I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of the private equity firm that just acquired 100% of your toxic debt. I am the entity that approved your $20 million wire transfer this morning, and I am the entity that instantly seized it back when you triggered the criminal liability default clauses." The reporters were frantically typing on their phones, broadcasting the destruction of the Wilson dynasty in real time. "You do not own a real estate empire anymore, Jerome," I stated, the cold facts echoing off the marble walls. "Your holding companies, your subsidiaries, your commercial properties, they all legally belong to my firm. You bankrupt your own legacy because you were too arrogant to realize you were walking into a trap." I turned slightly, focusing my gaze on Beatrice, who was trembling violently near the edge of the crowd. And to my mother I said, my voice dripping with icy precision, "You demanded I pay for this lavish gala to save your social standing. You extorted a $100,000 check from me this afternoon. What you failed to realize was that the check was drawn from a federally restricted bankruptcy holding account. By depositing those funds and wiring them to the event planners, you committed deliberate, documented bankruptcy fraud. The federal prosecutors currently holding your money laundering partner Harper have already received the transfer receipts." Beatrice's knees buckled. She collapsed against a cocktail table, sending crystal glasses shattering to the floor. No one moved to help her. The high society friends she had spent decades cultivating physically stepped away from her, treating her like a contagious disease. Finally, I turned my attention to Chloe. She was standing exactly where I had left her, her face completely drained of blood, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. The golden child was watching her entire universe evaporate. "The illusion is over, Chloe," I said softly, though the microphone carried the words to every corner of the vast room. "You are standing in a grand ballroom you cannot afford, trying to celebrate an engagement to a man who permanently blocked your phone number yesterday. The $10 million mansion you plan to sleep in tonight no longer belongs to your father. The corporate jet you use for your shopping trips has been grounded and seized by my legal team." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, savoring the absolute silence of the stunned crowd. In fact, I added, my eyes raking over her custom pearl-encrusted gown. "Every physical asset purchased with company funds is now the property of my holding firm, which means that the very dress currently hanging off your shoulders is technically borrowed from me. I highly suggest you do not spill anything else on it." Chloe let out a sharp, hysterical sob, turning and fleeing toward the service doors, unable to face the blinding flashes of the press cameras capturing her humiliation. I handed the microphone back to Marcus. The execution was complete. The Wilson family had brought me into this world to be their scapegoat, their punching bag, and their silent victim. Instead, I had become their absolute destruction. I had not just beaten them, I had legally, financially, and publicly eradicated them from existence. The chaos in the Astor Room was no longer just a murmur. It was a full-blown corporate panic. Investors were screaming into their cell phones, desperately trying to pull whatever remaining funds they had tied to Wilson Manufacturing. The string quartet had completely abandoned their instruments, staring at the screens in shock. Jerome stood paralyzed on the stage, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically across the room, as if searching for a magical escape route. There was none. I had sealed every exit. I turned my attention back to the crowd, intending to leave them to their misery, when a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the pandemonium. "Wait!" The crowd parted. Julian Vance stepped out from the shadows near the grand pillars. He had not skipped the gala. He had been standing in the back the entire evening, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, quietly observing the catastrophic collapse of the family he was supposed to marry into. Chloe, who had frozen near the service doors upon hearing his voice, spun around. A desperate, delusional spark of hope ignited in her tear-streaked face. She took a step toward him, her hands reaching out. "Julian!" She sobbed, her voice echoing in the sudden lull. "Julian, please, it is a lie. She is crazy. You have to believe me." Julian did not even look at her. His eyes were fixed entirely on me. His expression was a mixture of clinical disgust and grim realization. "Show them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet caught perfectly by the microphone Marcus still held. I gave a second sharp nod to the projection booth. The banking ledgers and the power of attorney contracts vanished from the massive LED screens. The ballroom was plunged into temporary darkness before a crisp, high-definition video feed illuminated the room. It was the security footage from the hospital corridor captured just days ago. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the Astor Room's state-of-the-art sound system. Every billionaire, every journalist, and every socialite in the room watched in stunned silence as the larger-than-life image of Chloe backed Marcus into a wall. They heard her voice, dripping with entitlement and desperation, begging my partner to sleep with her. They watched her tear open her own blouse, offering herself to another man, while wearing Julian Vance's multi-million-dollar engagement ring. The collective gasp that sucked the air out of the ballroom was deafening. Chloe let out a sound that was less human and more like a dying animal. She dropped to her knees, burying her face in her hands, the pearl-encrusted gown pooling around her on the marble floor. The final desperate illusion of her pristine reputation was incinerated in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. Julian finally turned his gaze down to her. He did not yell. He did not lose his composure. He delivered his verdict with the cold, absolute finality of a judge. "The Vance family will be issuing a formal press release in exactly 5 minutes," Julian announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "The engagement is permanently terminated. You disgust me, Chloe. And your family is a rotting liability. Do not ever attempt to contact me or my firm again." He turned on his heel and strode out of the ballroom, his private security detail falling in perfectly behind him. He did not look back. The silence he left behind was heavy, suffocating, and absolute, but it only lasted for a fraction of a second. "You vindictive, black-hearted demon!" The roar tore from the far side of the room. Harper, my father's brother and the primary architect of his offshore financial schemes, shoved his way through a group of terrified catering staff. He was sweating profusely, his face contorted into a mask of pure homicidal rage. He charged toward the center of the floor, his fists swinging wildly at his sides, completely unhinged by the sudden destruction of his illicit empire. "You think you are so smart?" Harper bellowed, spit flying from his lips as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin decades of work? You are nothing. You are a disgusting, ungrateful parasite. We built this family. I built the supply chains. I secured the overseas accounts. I will have you buried for this. I will sue you for corporate espionage, you little witch." He took another aggressive step forward. Marcus instantly shifted his weight, his broad shoulders blocking Harper's path, his eyes locked onto the older man with a terrifying, motionless intensity. Harper stopped abruptly, his self-preservation instinct overriding his blind fury. I stepped out from behind Marcus. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I simply stared at my uncle with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "You did build those supply chains," Harper, I agreed calmly. "And you did secure those overseas accounts. specifically the accounts in the Cayman Islands that you used to wash exactly $14 million of undeclared revenue over the last 36 months. Harper's jaw snapped shut. His eyes darted wildly, the arrogant rage instantly replaced by a deep primal terror. I looked up toward the projection booth. The hospital security footage vanished. In its place, the screens displayed a series of highly classified, heavily redacted federal documents. At the very top, bearing the unmistakable menacing seal of the Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Justice, was a federal asset freeze mandate. I read the bold print aloud, ensuring every word landed like a physical blow. Federal indictment and immediate asset seizure. Target Harper Wilson. Charge aggravated money laundering, wire fraud and tax evasion. I looked back down at him. Harper was swaying on his feet, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "I did not need to sue you, Harper," I stated, my voice echoing through the horrified ballroom. "The federal government is currently raiding your corporate offices. They have frozen your personal bank accounts, your investment portfolios, and your offshore trusts. You do not have a single dime to your name to hire a defense attorney. You are going to federal prison, and you are going to spend the rest of your natural life in a concrete box." Harper stumbled backward, clutching his chest. He looked frantically toward the stage, seeking support from his brother, but Jerome was still frozen, staring blankly at the destruction of his legacy. Then the most pathetic display of the evening unfolded. Darius, my older brother, the golden boy who had been groomed since birth to inherit the Wilson empire, had been standing near the champagne fountain. He had spent his entire life reaping the benefits of Harper and Jerome's corruption, turning a blind eye to the extortion and the violence as long as his trust fund was replenished. When he saw the IRS indictment blazing on the screens, a profound cowardly panic overtook him. He realized instantly that the sinking ship was going to drag everyone down with it. Harper lunged toward Darius, grabbing his nephew's tuxedo sleeve for support. Darius Harper gasped, his voice reedy and desperate. "You have to call the firm's lawyers. You have to authorize a defensive fund. Tell them we had no idea." Darius looked at the man who had funded his lavish lifestyle for 3 decades. He looked at the federal warrants displayed on the massive screens. Then he looked at the swarm of journalists, recording every single second of the exchange. Darius's face twisted into a mask of pure survivalist panic. He violently shoved Harper away. "Get off me!" Darius screamed, his voice cracking with terror. He threw his hands up in the air physically, backing away from his uncle and his father as if they were covered in flames. "I have nothing to do with this. I never signed those ledgers. I do not know anything about any offshore accounts or money laundering. I am just a consultant. I am not liable for any of this." He continued to backpedal, his eyes wide and frantic, scanning the crowd of reporters. "Write that down!" Darius yelled at the journalists, his dignity completely abandoning him. "I am fully cooperating with any federal investigation. I disavow all of their actions. I am leaving." Without another word to his weeping mother, his paralyzed father, or his disgraced sister, Darius spun around and sprinted for the exit, shoving past waiters and guests, in a desperate, cowardly bid to save his own skin. I stood in the center of the ballroom and watched the grand, invincible Wilson family tear each other apart. The loyalty they had always preached was a hollow, brittle lie, shattered by the first application of real pressure. They were not a dynasty. They were a den of thieves, and I had just locked the door and thrown a match inside. The realization of his absolute, irreversible defeat finally snapped the last remaining thread of Jerome's sanity. With a guttural, animalistic roar, he lunged from the stage. He was no longer a calculating CEO. He was a cornered, desperate predator intent on destroying the person who had dismantled his life. He raised a massive fist, aiming directly for my bruised face. He did not even make it halfway. Marcus moved with blinding speed, interposing his towering frame between me and my father. He caught Jerome's descending wrist mid-air, twisting it downward with a sharp, brutal efficiency that forced the older man to his knees. Jerome cried out in pain, his face contorted in agony, but Marcus did not let go. He held him there, pinned to the marble floor of the Astor room, looking down at him with an expression of cold, clinical detachment. Right on cue, the heavy doors of the ballroom burst open. A dozen uniformed Atlanta police officers flooded into the room, followed closely by plainclothes federal agents. The wail of sirens outside finally penetrated the thick walls of the hotel, a screeching soundtrack to the end of the Wilson Empire. Jerome struggled weakly against Marcus's grip, his eyes darting frantically toward the approaching officers. "You cannot do this," he gasped, spit flying from his lips. "I am Jerome Wilson. I am a pillar of this community. This is a private event." I stepped forward, looking down at the man who had tormented me for my entire life. "The police are not just here to assist the federal agents with your bankruptcy fraud, Jerome," I stated smoothly, my voice carrying clearly over the rising clamor of the press. "Do you remember the smart home security system you forced me to install at the estate? The one you thought you wiped clean after you hit me in the face with a landscaping brick?" His eyes widened in sheer terror. "I built that network," I reminded him. "I designed the cloud backup protocols. I handed the original unedited high-definition video of your aggravated assault over to the district attorney yesterday morning. You are not going to a white-collar minimum security facility for financial crimes. You are going to a maximum security state penitentiary for felony domestic violence." Two officers grabbed Jerome roughly by the arms, hauling him to his feet and wrenching his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The lead detective loudly recited his Miranda rights, detailing the charges of aggravated assault and massive financial fraud. Beatrice was on the floor weeping hysterically, her designer makeup running down her face in ugly black streaks. Chloe was gone, having fled out the back service doors to escape the relentless blinding flashes of the press cameras. Harper was already pinned against the champagne fountain by federal agents screaming for a lawyer he could no longer afford. The grand invincible Wilson family had been completely eradicated. I turned away from the pathetic display. I did not feel an ounce of guilt, and I did not feel the need to gloat. The execution was flawless, and my debt was paid in full. I reached out and took Marcus's hand, his fingers warm and steady around mine. I offered a genuine, radiant smile to the sea of flashing cameras, allowing them to capture the definitive image of my victory. Together, Marcus and I walked out of the ballroom, stepping out of the suffocating shadow of the Wilson family forever. I left them behind to burn in the ashes of the empire they had built on lies, leaving the people who had spent a lifetime calling me a disappointment to finally understand the true meaning of the word.